How do you cope with wealth, status, and fame if you have it today at the same time? We have learned and read and known and even experienced firsthand that people are ruined because of prosperity if we are not able to handle prosperity in our lives. If our character is not sufficient to handle all the weight, the wealth, the status and fame and power, it can actually destroy us. If our character is not able to sustain, it will actually be a disadvantage to a person. So how do you cope up with wealth, status, and fame if you have it today? Is by having a good character. And I was reading this sermon of one pastor many years ago. He said, the secret to power is character. Because it's only when you have character that supports that power that you are able to sustain it. But without character, power can corrupt any one of us. Wealth can corrupt any one of us and even destroy families and relationships and wealth and everything. So character, the secret to power is character. And he said, but the secret to character is God. It is when we allow God to move in our lives and work out in our lives that character. It's only then that we are able to develop a strong and stable character brought about by the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives. In that case, we may allow God to continue to work in your life so that He can form that character, that Christ-likeness, the values, the dignity, the integrity, and all these things, so that whenever all these things come to our lives, we are ready and we are prepared, and it is sustainable because we have a good character. So today, the title of our conversation in the 5th episode of our series, Throne to the Throne, is God's time. If God's silence is one of the struggle that we have, it's also God's time is one of the mysterious things that we ever encounter in our lives. Because sometimes we tend to assume that God is operating on the same timetable that we have. His timing is different. That's why Isaiah said that in his letter, that my ways are higher than your ways. And my thoughts, God said through Isaiah, is not your thoughts. God's time is one of our struggle. And sometimes you are saying, Lord, you're late. God is never late. God's timing is one of the crucial things we have to encounter and struggle and wrestle with as we follow Him. Now, in Joseph's story, in chapter 41 of Genesis, this is one of the things that Joseph struggled with. And we will learn today how Joseph draw his strength while waiting upon the Lord and the fulfillment of God's promise in his heart. So Genesis 41, as I was studying it again and again and digging deeper in understanding Genesis 41, one of the things, you can learn so many things in Genesis 41, but here's what I want you to take home. And I will skip some of the key verses because I will summarize it with you. But the lesson that I want you to catch in Genesis 41 is this. Despite the delay, because Joseph, little did he realize when he asked favor from the chief cupbearer, remember me, mention me to Pharaoh the moment everything went well for you. Please remember me to Pharaoh because I was kidnapped from the land of my fathers and I was brought here. I was not even guilty of any charges. I was imprisoned unjustly. So he was begging the chief cupbearer last Sunday, mention me to Pharaoh, that I will have audience to Pharaoh, so that I can have a chance to defend myself. That was the ending. And Joseph was wondering maybe the following day, the door of the prison cell someone will knock to bring him out. And he was hoping that one day, 1 week, 2 weeks. But little did Joseph realize that was not the time for God to deliver him. So I was imagining again, Joseph, what can we learn from Genesis 41? Imagine Joseph was telling us, despite the delay, one thing I have learned is to depend on God all the way. It's one thing to depend on God, but it's another thing to depend on God all the way, even the turns, even the detours, even all the delays, see to it that we stay with God until He fulfills His purpose in our lives. So this is a take-home. Despite the delay, Joseph is saying, depend on God all the way. 2 full years, Genesis 41, 2 full years. If they have the same calendar with us, 365 days times 2, those were the days that Joseph was waiting and longing that he will be summoned by Pharaoh because the chief cupbearer mentioned him. So he will have a fair chance, at least to open his heart so that he will be released and go home to his father, Jacob. 2 full years, he waited. Then Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. Now, timing, the reason why I put a title, God's Time, because in the entire chapter 41, there are glimpses of words and phrases that talks about time. I want you to open your eyes. So Pharaoh had a dream, and he was standing by the Nile. Now, before we dive into the dream of Pharaoh, let me just give you a picture of the Nile, because the Nile River is probably the most important water supply for the entire Egypt, including Sudan or Southern Africa. So Nile River is a very important factor for Egypt. Actually, one of the Greek historian commented and said that Egypt is the gift of the Nile. Without the Nile, Egypt would die. Nile River is the primary source of irrigation and everything. Look at the map. This is how you can see the modern Egypt today. That Nile River runs almost 7,000 kilometers from the south to the north. That's how huge and probably the longest river in the world, the Nile River. And if you see the map, you see Israel on the other side, you see Saudi Arabia on the other side. Nile River plays a major role for the civilization of Egypt. When the dream of Pharaoh, he was standing by the Nile, it's no doubt maybe the palace of Pharaoh, the monarch of Egypt, is situated near the Nile. The present-day Egypt, at night, you will see the lights. It is lighted, the entire Nile River, because establishments, restaurants, everything were built by the Nile. And you can see it from space. The root of that Nile River, it releases 3 million liters of water that runs almost 7 kilometers to the north. And interesting, when they were building the pyramid, they would carry the limestone that they would use down under, they will get it passed through the river up to Cairo. It's a blessing in disguise for the Egyptians. During the year, there were times that it will overflow and it will irrigate the entire field and the land of Egypt. That's why it's very fertile. But there were times that it will overflow and there will be flood, that it becomes a curse for them. That they would hate not the Nile because it's not only the source of life, sometimes it's a source of death when it is overflowing in flood that would kill thousands, if not millions of people. Pharaoh was dreaming and he was standing by the Nile, and here's the dream of Pharaoh. He saw 7 fat cows, beautiful cows, coming up of the Nile. And then all of a sudden he saw 7 sickly, thin cows coming out from the bank of the Nile. And later on, these 7 ugly cows devoured the fat and beautiful cows. And all of a sudden he woke up. How many of you have experienced dreaming? It's a nightmare. Pagtulog mo, part 2. Di ba yung nagising ka, pagtulog mo, continuation ng dream. So si Pharaoh may ganon. Sa unang panaginip niya, nagising siya. Tubig. Pagtulog niya, second dream, the same thing. There's this grain, 7 heads of grain, healthy. And on the other side, a withered grain. And this withered, ugly grain ate this healthy grain. And all of a sudden, he woke up and he was so disturbed. He was so bothered and troubled. Egyptians during those times, they believed that the gods with the small g usually speaks to the monarchs. And Pharaoh in those days are actually considered to be gods. That were these oracles from the outer gods would speak through them. But this time, Pharaoh was so helpless that he was so bothered about the dream. And he was actually scared. It's a scary dream. And as usual, because he was Pharaoh, he was the most powerful person in Egypt, the next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dream, so he called all the magicians and the wise men of Egypt. Remember last week, there was this school of interpretations for them. So he called them all and he said, okay, I have a dream. When Pharaoh told them the dreams, unfortunately, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Remember that not one of them, chief baker and the cupbearer, when they were so sad, and Joseph said, why are you so sad? And we had dreamed that no one can tell us. No one can tell us because they were in prison. But here in Pharaoh's situation, no one can tell them, but these men are here, but still no one can interpret. And Pharaoh was so disappointed. And then finally, look at that word. I like that word. Finally, it speaks about time. It speaks about the waiting is over. Probably the king's chief, remember the cupbearer who has forgotten Joseph and not even thought of him a single time? And I don't know how Joseph would feel, so disappointed that the person that he helped has forgotten him totally. during that time when there was session of Pharaoh asking for the interpretation of the dreams, this chief cupbearer was there listening, and all of a sudden, look at this. Today, out of the blue, he commented to Pharaoh, "Today I have been reminded of my failure." Look at that. Before we judge chief cupbearer that he has forgotten, it's an honest mistake for him. He was accepting, I was so terrible. Today I was reminded of my failure. Look at God. Where is God behind the scene? Who would remind him at a particular juncture of his life? The moment, the timing is very clear. And he said, "Today I have been reminded of my failure," he told Pharaoh. And Pharaoh looked at him probably and say, "What are you talking about?" And here's the cupbearer. "You remember, Sir King, Your Excellency, you remember some time ago, you were angry at us together with the chief baker." And maybe Pharaoh said, "Oh yeah, I remember that. And you imprisoned us. Remember, you threw us in prison in the palace of the guard." "Oh yeah." Pharaoh said, "Go on, what are you saying?" "You know, sir, one night when we were in prison, the chief cupbearer and myself, each one of us had a dream." "Okay, what happened?" And it had its own meaning. "And there was this young Hebrew man." Pause for a while. Look at that. He was already a man. In contrast, when he was 17 years old, diba? He was a boy. How many years was Joseph in the prison or in the service of Potiphar? But here, the narrator is very specific by saying, look, there was this young Hebrew man, because from 17 years old, maybe Joseph was about 20 plus here. Later on, we'll find out. There was this Hebrew man with us in prison who is a slave of the captain of the guard. Again, it will be attached to his name. We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. And maybe Pharaoh was looking, "Oh, so what? And you know what, sir? Everything happened just as he had predicted." "Really?" "Yes, sir. Everything happened. Remember, I was restored to my position after 3 days. And the chief baker, you executed him and you hung him on the pole." "You mean all of those things was told to you, as interpreted to you by this young Hebrew?" "Yes, sir." So if you are Pharaoh and you are so disappointed with your magicians and wise men, and you are so eager to know the interpretation of your 2 dreams, your nightmare, what would you do? Look at the next verse. "So Pharaoh sent for Joseph." So what are you waiting for? Call that man. So right away, they sent for Joseph at once. I can imagine. I like to imagine when I'm reading the scripture. That day, little did Joseph realize he was doing his rounds. He was making the most out of his time. He would do his duties faithfully, but little did Joseph, I don't know if he already gave up hoping in God, but obviously not, that the door of the prison cell will be open and he will be summoned. That was the day. God's timing is always perfect, never late, never early. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. I don't know if Joseph was like, "What did I do? What did I do?" "You are summoned by Pharaoh." And after he shaved and changed his clothes, because there's a protocol, I don't know, walang razor given to Joseph, balbasarado na si Joseph, mukhang ermitanyo. So, sinave siya, kinalbo siya, and everything, and he was given a clothes, and he went in, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, Joseph found himself standing before the most powerful man in Egypt. Can you imagine standing before Pharaoh? Joseph, a prisoner, a slave. I could imagine what is going on with Joseph. It's a mixed emotion of, will I be sentenced to death? What would I do? Is this my chance? Did the chief cupbearer mention me? He found himself standing before the powerful man in that civilization during those times. And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream last night. And no one here," look at those magicians and wise men. They are all bowing their heads. "None of them can tell me what it means, but I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it." Now, I want you to pay attention to the answer of Joseph. I don't know if iba-iba siguro ang sagot natin, depending on who we are. But look at how Joseph responded to the king. "I heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it." And here comes Joseph. Look at how he responded. "It is beyond my power to do this." Now, this is the translation of the New Living Translation. In other version, it says, "I'm sorry, I cannot do it." Nung binabasa ko sa ibang translation, Joseph naman, you had that opportunity. Why will you begin a statement that, "I'm so sorry, I cannot do it"? It is beyond my power to do this. But look at Joseph. He was very careful not to take the glory. He was very careful in his words because he was facing the greatest power in those days. But look at Joseph here. Pay attention to the next verse. It is beyond my power to do this, sir, your excellency. But God, for the first time, he would mention that. Can you imagine mentioning your faith, your God, in front of a monarch? Remember, there are 3 times Joseph mentioned and declared his faith. Number 1, when he was being tempted by Mrs. Potiphar, he said, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against my God? First time he declared his faith publicly. The second thing is when he was talking to the chief baker and cupbearer, only God owns the interpretation of the dreams. He said that. And this is the third time, before Pharaoh. God. Look at this. Maybe Pharaoh was saying, whose God are we talking about, Joseph? In Egypt, there are so many gods. Are you talking about Ra, the God of the sun? Are you talking about the God of the Nile? Whose God are we talking about? In the progression of history, 400 years, Moses again will face Pharaoh and demonstrate and show down between the gods of the Egyptian and the one and true living God. And you will notice in Exodus that none of the gods of Egypt can be compared with the one and true living God. That's why the 10 plagues are the 10 gods that cannot do anything against the God of Israel. But here Joseph saying, God, don't worry, Pharaoh. God, my God, the God of my fathers, God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. Now, the scripture is not so detailed, but somehow there is an exchange of conversation here that probably, most likely, Joseph was trying, sir, this is the God of my father. The God who will interpret your dreams. Later on, Pharaoh would even use that word God. Later on, hold on to that thought. Joseph responded because right after that, Pharaoh retold his story. This is my dream. And after he said all those dreams, the 2 dreams, Joseph responded to Pharaoh by saying, sir, your excellency, both of your dreams means the same thing. So what do you mean? God, again, here comes Joseph. God, he's very careful. He would not say, Pharaoh, I have the gift of interpretation. It's so easy. It's easy, Pharaoh. The meaning is this. No, he was very careful that he would always point to God saying, because here, Pharaoh would realize that the gods of Egypt and all the wise men of Egypt would be rendered useless and limitless or limited compared to the God of this Hebrew man. Joseph said, both of your dreams, Pharaoh, means the same thing. God. This is the God of my ancestor, the God of my father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God who created the heavens and the earth is telling you, Pharaoh. Look at the time frame here. God is telling Pharaoh in advance, you are being given a premonition, Pharaoh, of what you are about to do. God is about to do something in Egypt, in the world, and He has chosen you, Pharaoh. He has revealed it to you. For Pharaoh, a monarch who is perceived to be God, small g, that God can speak through him, the gods of Egypt can speak through Pharaoh, he was rendered helpless before the God of a Hebrew man. Wow, this is a showdown. The implication of this is Joseph is saying, none of the gods of Egypt is comparable to the God of my ancestor. And then he continues saying, the 7 healthy cows that you dream about, Pharaoh, and the 7 healthy heads of grain, both represent 7 years of prosperity. Maybe they look at each other, the council, the magistrates of Pharaoh, they look at each other, okay, it's a prosperity. Yes, sir, 7 years of plenty. Okay, continue, Joseph. The 17 scrawny cows that came up later and the 17 heads of grain withered by the east wind represent 7 years of famine, sir. Oh, you mean there is famine? Yes, sir. There will be first a plenty of 7 years, and there comes another 7 years of famine. So continue, Joseph. What happens afterwards? This will happen, sir, just as I have described it. Why? For God, again, Joseph for the 3rd time, would always point to God, saying to Pharaoh, you are not in control, Pharaoh. It is the God of my father. Oh, this is powerful. How can you say that to a monarch who is perceived to be all-powerful? And here's a Hebrew man, not to mention a slave and a prisoner. This will happen just as I have described it. For God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. Repeated second times by Joseph. And I was imagining Pharaoh was just contemplating every word. I don't know if napapahiya si Pharaoh because who are you to say, did you know that I have all the power in this land, being the king and the Pharaoh? And then Joseph said, the next 7 years, sir, will be a period of great prosperity. Not just prosperity, sir. It would be a great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt. So something very positive. Okay, that's good. But, Your Excellency, Your Highness, but after the 7 years of plenty, there will be 7 years of famine, so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. And then look at the last line. Famine will destroy the land. The interpretation of the dream is like a judgment and a warning. So if you are Pharaoh, that you are responsible for any decisions for the land, and everybody's looking up to you, so he has the call. The ball is on the side of Pharaoh. And here comes Joseph as a prophet, as an oracle saying, famine will destroy the land, Pharaoh. And I was imagining as if Pharaoh was waiting for what should we do? What should we do? You are responsible. You have to do something, Pharaoh. And maybe in Pharaoh's mind, he was already thinking in advance. And many things are going on in his mind. And then Joseph continues saying, this famine will be so severe. Maybe nangingilabot na yung mga counsel ni Pharaoh. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. Whew. Joseph was standing there shaved. Probably thin. Nawala na yung kanyang well-built and handsome. Kasi nasa prison ka eh. Standing there speaking with boldness and clarity. As for having two similar dreams, si Joseph hindi napigilan, tuloy-tuloy eh, no? When you are being anointed and empowered and emboldened, tuloy-tuloy si Joseph as if he doesn't really care whether he was talking, I don't know if he has forgotten talking to a powerful man, as having two similar dreams, sir. It means that these events have been decreed by God, meaning decided by God, and He will soon make them happen. It is not you, Pharaoh, who is in control. Tinatanggalan mo ng arms si Pharaoh sa harapan ng kanyang magistrates. Can you imagine? I don't know, siyempre may certain pride. Kung Pharaoh ka, I am the most powerful man and I cannot do anything. Yes, because it has been decided by God, Pharaoh. And it does not only happen, it will happen very soon. You are late already. In the light of what I have said, the famine, everything, in the light of what I have just said, Pharaoh, therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Little did Joseph realize he was already making his job description because that's his work. Eh. Can you imagine? Maybe Joseph was just, after all the interpretation, he doesn't know that he will be like, Pharaoh can decide, okay, thank you for your insight, go back to prison. Pharaoh can send him back to prison. Or the best that he can do is, Pharaoh, siguro naman may konting palubag na loob, sir, nakapag-interpret ako. Oh, so what's your request? Sir, maybe he would plead this case, I was kidnapped from my land. Maybe at least send me home. Give me a ride. Release me. Little did Joseph realize, he was not only interpreting the dreams, he was giving prescription of what to do. Galing ni Joseph. Therefore, Pharaoh, at this portion and the next verses, jaw-dropping for all the Egyptian magistrates and council. Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then, not only that, then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 years. Look at the management and the administration and the strategic planning of Joseph is operational. Can you imagine? He was like saying, out of the blue, releasing Pharaoh, this is what you need to do. You have to appoint a ministry coordinator. Can you imagine? He has already all the plans. And Pharaoh probably was, where did you get that idea? As if it was very clear in the mind of Joseph what needs to be done. Oh, wow. Kaya nung ini-imagine ko to, all the magistrates and the council and the wise men of Egypt were all, what? He does not only know the interpretation of the dreams, he also know what to do in preparation. Have them gathered all the food produced in the good years, sir, and just ahead, and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouse, sir. Kailangan pala magpagawa ka ng malaking storage or warehouse. Pangalanan mo, sir, Pharaoh's warehouse. Wow, okay, take note of that. Everybody was taking note. Pharaoh's storehouse, and store it away and guard it, sir, so that there will be food in the city. And I was imagining Pharaoh was saying, oh, that sounds good. What else? What else? That way there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, sir, this famine will destroy the entire land of Egypt. I was imagining they were looking at each other. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. Before this happens, I was just imagining maybe Pharaoh saying, okay, hold on for a while. Everyone go to my chamber. They were like talking, so what do you think? Because how could Pharaoh trust a slave, a prisoner, with no credential at all, just a statement from a chief baker, entrust everything and the welfare of the entire Egypt to a man that he only met a few minutes ago? Called his counselor and said, what do you think? What do you think? What should we do? And after that recess, they go back, call Joseph. Joseph's suggestion, we talk about, and your suggestions is well received. Unanimous decision. They were saying, what a brilliant strategic planning, management, administration, etc. None of us have that wisdom demonstrated by this young Hebrew man. Look, so Pharaoh asked his officials. He asked his officials. Now that we are amenable with the suggestion and the strategy of Joseph, now number 2, so Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone like this man? So obviously filled with the Spirit of God. Again, this time Pharaoh is using God in the capital G. This is similar to Potiphar. When he bought Joseph fresh from the slave market, he observed Joseph and he noticed that the Lord was with Joseph and everything that he did was prosperous and successful. How did Potiphar saw? How did he see God's hand in Joseph? His demeanor, everything that he do is malinis siya gumawa. But at this time, it was Pharaoh now, the most powerful man of Egypt, the one who noticed, is there anyone in this world we can find like this man, obviously filled with the Spirit. When I was reading that, I was like, oops, Pharaoh, it's capital S. It's not just the Spirit, it's the Spirit. Probably because he was so amazed with the wisdom that was flowing in Joseph. If you are full of wisdom in those days, you're going, wow, the Spirit of God is in you because of the wisdom words and oracles that you're saying. Even the most powerful person recognize and notice the hand of God with Joseph. So officials, can we find anyone? And everybody were like, none, sir, none. Can we find anyone like this man? None, sir. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God, this time si Pharaoh na gumagamit ng God, no? Can I borrow your God? Okay, sir. Since God, not the gods of Egyptian, your God, since this God who is so powerful, since God has revealed the meaning to the dreams to you, clearly, sabi ni Pharaoh, obviously, no one else is as intelligent or as wise as you are. And I was imagining Joseph shaking at the presence of the most powerful man. And then the words, can you imagine, no? You would hear, you will be in charge of my court. He heard this already. When Potiphar noticed that the Lord was with Joseph from a field slave to a house slave, promoted to be an attendant. From that attendant, Potiphar said, because you're so good, I will put you in charge of my entire palace. Sounds familiar, but this time it's totally different. It's Pharaoh, the monarch of Egypt. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. And I don't know, what would you do? How would you cope with the wealth, status, and fame coming to you at the same time on one day? Can you imagine? Kung hindi sapat ang character ni Joseph, if his character was not molded properly by God, and if he was not matured and ready, it would have destroyed Joseph. Despite the delay, I will depend on God all the way to the end. I will put you in charge. You are in charge, Joseph. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby, bag. I don't know what happened there. Or maybe meron siya nung scepter. I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Can you imagine? What's going on? Am I dreaming? Maybe kinukurot-kurot ni Joseph sa sarili. Naginip ba ako? In charge of Potiphar, okay. In charge of the war prison cell, okay. In charge of Egypt, the then known world civilization. Am I hearing you correctly? Yes, you will be in charge of the entire land of Egypt, Joseph. And not only that, it happened so fast. Pharaoh stood up. I believe he stood up. He got his ring, signet ring, and put it to Joseph. Joseph, give me your finger. Can you imagine with the signet ring in his hand? You know what the signet ring means? It's like the signature or the rubber stamp today, given him a blanket authority, absolute power. Whatever you do, it's like I am the one doing it, Joseph. Sign it. It's like you're given a credit card. You're given a blank checkbook with signatures of your boss. Do whatever you please. Signet ring. That wherever he goes, he would put the signet ring as if Pharaoh was the one ordering it. Not only the ring, look at this. And then Pharaoh said, come, anong size mo? Small, sir. Okay. He got his linen, fine linen clothing. You know, clothing in those days, wala pa mga tailor, are very expensive because handmade. Robe. At this time, I was imagining, sabi siguro ni Joseph, sir, pwede ba wala ng robe? Parati ako nauhubaran ng robe, sir. No, Joseph, this time it's different. This is the robe, the royal robe of Egypt. Joseph, whoa, can you imagine the royalty, the dignity of Joseph? I don't know what's going on in his mind. This is happening at the same time. Today, God's time, Joseph has arrived. Not only that, sabi ni Pharaoh, hindi bagay, may singsing ka, may robe ka, wala kang necklace. Sabi ni Pharaoh, here's thy gold chain. Can you imagine? Hang a gold chain around his neck. Hindi pa tapos, Joseph. Kaya nga sabi ko how do you cope with sudden wealth, status, and fame coming to you at the same time today? Without a strong character, it will destroy Joseph. Then he had Joseph ride. I'll give you my chariot, the second in command chariot reserved for the second in command. Chariots, imagine, yung mga horses po before, the good ones and the better ones are reserved for Pharaoh and the king. The second in command chariot was given to Joseph. Joseph, you will need, because Egypt is so wide and vast, you will need a ride. Our present counterpart today, you are given a limousine with the seal of the government, 002. You're the second car. Can you imagine the president is 01? Ikaw, 02. Can you imagine chariots? And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. In other translation, give way, or bow down, or attention. And whenever he visits a town, ta-ta-tan, ta-ta-tan, the second in command, and everyone in the town would bow their heads in the presence of a mighty governor of Egypt. I could imagine when people were bowing, the dream of Joseph is flashing back to him. God, in His perfect time, is fulfilling the dreams at the same time. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt. And then Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, Joseph, but no one will lift a hand or a foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. So see, absolute power and authority. Sabi ni Joseph, oh, this is overwhelming, sir. Overwhelming. Sa loob-loob ko lang si Joseph siguro, what is this, Lord? The waiting is finally over. So he was ready to go. And then all of a sudden, sabi ni Pharaoh, sandali lang, Joseph, not yet finished. I will give you a new name, Joseph, because you represent now the palace. You represent me now. I will give you an Egyptian name. From now on, you will be called Zapnat Paneah, which means in Egypt, which means God speaks, or the revealer of dreams. God speaks, and it happens. Whoa! Sabi ni Joseph, thank you, sir. Let's go. No, not yet. I'll give you a wife. He also gave him a wife. Can you imagine? Some Bible scholars were arguing, si Joseph daw nag-compromise dahil hindi daw believer. Teka. Wala siyang choice. It was given, arranged to him. But later on, you will see before the end of our chapter that there is a probability that the wife of Joseph, who is the daughter of the priest, the pagan priest, became a believer as well. Look at this. Sabi ni Pharaoh, he also gave him a wife whose name is Asenath. She was the daughter of Potiphar. Oh, sir! I was just imagining Joseph was like, the daughter of Potiphar? Sounds like my former boss. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. Oh, hold on to that now. Being the second in command in Egypt, he will need bodyguards. Remember? Who will you call? The captain of the guard. Can you imagine that very morning when he was appointed as in charge of the land of Egypt, and there were newspapers. I was imagining Egyptian Gazette, Egyptian Post. Everybody were reading the newspaper, and here's Potiphar in the morning and Mrs. Potiphar having their coffee, and when they opened the front page, a Hebrew man, slave, has been appointed Prime Minister of Egypt. If you are Potiphar and Mrs. Potiphar, sa tingin ko nanginginig ka na. Because you will know what will he do now. Can you imagine when Joseph called the captain of the guard, I will be needing bodyguards as I go around the entire Egypt. And Potiphar would come before him and bow before Joseph. But look at the maturity of Joseph. He did not use his position to take revenge. There was no record. Lagot ka sa akin ngayon, Potiphar. Halika nga dito. Ano? Wala, alam mo naman, wala akong ginawa. Siguro si Mrs. Potiphar, I don't know, nag-aal sa balutan na si Mrs. Potiphar, uuwi na lang ako. Everything can go, something will go to your mind, and you will be so scared because the man that you maltreated is now in position. Look at the reversal. Here, your employee now becomes your boss and your supervisor. That's why you have to be kind. And look at this. The author of Genesis saying, he was 30 years old. Joseph was 30 years old when he began serving in Pharaoh's court. Mathematical problem. If Joseph was 30 years old when he started serving, and he was 17 years old when he had the dream, and he waited for 2 years in prison for the chief bearer to mention him, how many years was he serving Potiphar and in prison? Galing, and he's giving us a glimpse. He was 30 years old. He began serving in the court of Pharaoh and the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, can you imagine? He inspected the entire land of Egypt. Wow, running start. Tindi ni Joseph, you know? He goes around. The entire chapter 41 tells us, in the past 7 years, it was so prosperous. At the end of 7 years, Joseph had 2 sons. Now, I want you to pay attention as we close, that there is a probability that the wife of Joseph, who is a non-believer, was converted to the faith of Joseph, because the first son was given the name Manasseh, which means God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family. I was just saying, not literally forgetting na wala na akong pamilya, no. Because the next chapter next week is more dramatic. You will see that Joseph was longing and missing his brother. What is being said here is that all the while pala, siyempre tao lang si Joseph, may hurts eh. But he was not dwelling in the resentment and hurts, but there was hurt. Naalala niya yung ginawa. But because of his son, he learned to forget. Look at the healing of God in Joseph's life. Baka tayo kailangan ng healing. Maaring hindi ka kumikibo, pero baon-baon mo yung sama ng loob mo. The next son of Joseph is Ephraim, which means God has made me fruitful in this land of my suffering. We need to forget first in order for us to be fruitful. You will never be fruitful. You will never blossom until you carry that load. Beautiful. Let me pause for a while. Continue next Sunday, a more dramatic eksena sa buhay ni Joseph. Going back to my question a while ago, how do you cope with wealth, status, and fame coming to you at the same time in one day? Bigla kang na-appoint as CEO, biglang yaman, from obscurity you become so popular. Alam niyo po ba na blessing na hindi tayo binibigyan agad ng Diyos ng 1 million? Kasi baka maloko-loko tayo at hindi natin kayanin. Because without a solid character, power, wealth, and fame can actually destroy us. But God's time for Joseph is perfect. It was the perfect time. Joseph was matured. That's why look at Joseph. When he was promoted as in charge of the land of Egypt, the first thing that he did was to do the work instead of going to the people who hurt him and take vengeance. Never it was mentioned about Joseph because his character was prepared. In God's time, He makes all things beautiful. Huwag mong pilitin, baka hilaw eh. Huwag mong pitasin ng wala sa oras. Huwag masyadong makulit. Na para bang binabagabag mo ang Diyos. Gusto, Lord, I need patience. I want it now. In God's time, that's why your take home is this. Joseph, what can you tell us? You know, despite the delay, the detour, I have learned to fully trust and hope. Depend on God all the way. Hindi pa tapos. Sisimula pa lang yung promotion ni Joseph. Next week, the 7 years of famine. But look at Joseph here. He was depending on God all the way. Sticking with God. In turns, in curves, in detours. In spite of the delay, we can stay with God no matter what happens. Amazing. So here's my challenge for all of us. In the light of this truth, let us count on God's promises. How do you count on God's promises? By relying on Him, by leaning on Him, not trusting on our own ability and strength. Counting on God's promises, depending on God doesn't mean you're not doing anything. No. Be like Joseph. While waiting, while the delay, he was making the most of his time. He was upgrading himself. There is no doubt that Joseph learned the language of Egypt. How can he converse with Pharaoh? How can he converse with the prisoners? He learned the language of Egypt. He learned everything, maybe as much as he can. So while we're waiting for God, while there is delay to our promises, to God's promises to us, the best way to count on God's promises is not to sit down and do nothing. Make the most of every situation. Improve ourselves. Upgrade yourself. Because any day is a preparation day so that when the time has come, you're equipped. You're ready. Preparation is necessary. Pag tayo yung sitting pretty. Sabi ni Pastor count on God's promises. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're not doing anything. No. Be Joseph. Kagaya din na sinabi ni Paul Make the most of every situation in your life. Knowing that the days are evil. Why? Why count on God's promises? Because He who began a good work in you is faithful and He will finish it. Amen?
I'm letting go of every single dream. I lay each one down at your feet. Every moment of my wandering never changes what you see. I tried to win this war, I confess. My hands are weary, I need your rest. Mighty warrior, king of the fight. No matter what I face, you're by my side. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. Truth is, you know what tomorrow brings. There's not a day ahead you have not seen. So let all things be my life and breath. I want what you want, Lord, and nothing less. When you don't move trust in you. I will trust in